We're going to be in 2 Samuel. You guys hold it down and don't make too much noise tonight. For those of you who are online because of the storms and stuff, we have a much smaller class than usual, but we are always delighted to have a chance for us to study together. As we'd finished up 1 Samuel, the tragedy that includes Saul and Jonathan, and virtually the whole Israeli army being killed, is just a very, very tragic event. And as you look at all the things that unfold, that there have been years and years that Saul has been pursuing David, he's been chasing David, and finally David has left and moved down to Ziklag, which is a Philistine city kind of on the border, on the boundary, and he is going to live there until Saul is killed. And I'd like for us to look at just, first of all, just kind of highlight some of the events in the first 6 chapters, and 2 or 3 of these we're going to spend a little more time on, but we want to just look at this and notice this transition because with the death of Saul, then this moves things a step closer to what took place when Samuel came. And remember, Samuel anoints the first king, Saul, in 1 Samuel. Samuel also anointed the young shepherd boy. And it's going to be a period of transition. There's a lot of change that takes place. But this is also going to be a part of the unfolding of the plan and the will of God. And this will be crystallized. And by the time, Lord willing, we're finished tonight, then David will finally be anointed as the king over Israel. But the first thing that happens, and remember, twice David has had the chance to kill Saul, once in a cave, once in the camp, and had that opportunity, and will not do that because he is the Lord's anointed. And 2 Samuel opens with a young Amalekite who comes and brings a part of the royal paraphernalia of the things that belong to Saul. He claims that he killed King Saul, and we know that Saul fell on his sword, and was he completely dead? Did he actually do that? Did he come across a dead man and took the things? We don't know. But being especially an outsider, meaning not an Israelite, I'm sure he expected some type of reward, some type of congratulations on the part of David. And little does he know that when he brings these reminders of Saul's reign, then David just very quickly and quietly mentions, do not touch the Lord's anointed, and has the young man killed. It's just kind of a very harsh thing. But all through his life, David respected God's position, even if the person in that position was not living up to it. Then the latter part of the first chapter, and we'll read this, and there's a couple of reasons for this. One night, and I haven't just picked it out yet, but one night we're going to just highlight a little bit of the Psalms of David, at least one night. And one of the lasting contributions of David's life is 75 of our 150 Psalms have his name attached to them. When you read through the actual book, there's going to be 73, and twice, and I think they're in the book of Acts, David said, and these are Psalms that don't have a name and designation. And so anyway, half of the Psalms of the hymn book of Israel are going to be written by David. And very appropriately, upon hearing the death of Saul and Jonathan, then David writes this lament. And let me just mention that very quickly. The largest percentage of Psalms in the Old Testament are actually laments. And it's a sense of God, because of the things that have happened, either where are you, or why did you let that take place, or what took place. And what's very interesting to me is that when you compare our hymn book, How many laments do we have in our hymn book? You just very, very little. Even like this world is not my home, there's a few things that are just questions and things. Craig, would you help with an outline? But when you look at this, the largest percentage of Psalms in the Old Testament are going to be these just heartfelt laments. And very appropriate because Richard's come in tonight, not been able to do the grief class. Isn't it interesting that the largest selection of Psalms in the Old Testament are things where people are either hurting, their hearts are broken, or they're asking why, and these different questions. And biblically, it's really important that we help people to learn to lament, to grieve over loss, and not either feel guilty or feel bad about that. We had a very interesting counseling teacher. His name was John Scott in Memphis. And John Scott had gone to University of Pennsylvania or Penn State, doing kind of like an Old Testament apologetics degree. And he said, I wanted to know every logical reason why someone wasn't a Christian. And so he's enrolled, he's in this PhD program. Well, he's in this local church, and he's also starts doing some counseling, and he comes to this conclusion: people's emotional reasons for not becoming Christians are stronger than their logical reasons. How logical was the mob that crucified Jesus? I mean, yeah, they're determined to kill him, but it's primarily emotion. And you look at all these things that happen in the book of Acts, it's primarily this emotion. And he said, I figured out while I was doing my PhD in apologetics for the rational reasons for people to become Christians, that the majority of people, their emotional reasons are even stronger than that. And he, of course, we didn't have online things. He would have a Mickey Mouse balloon and blow it up nearly to capacity. And he would say, before he did this, everyone just be prepared. And if you're ever in Disneyland, bring me another one. And he would blow it to capacity, put the plug in, and then he would squeeze the left ear all the way down to the head. Well, what's going to happen to the balloon? The pressure is going to have to go somewhere else, and he becomes deformed. Something has to come out somewhere. And, occasionally the balloon would pop when he did that, but what did he say? The longer that we hold things in, if we don't have an outlet for them at some point, they come out somewhere else. And the healthy thing is learning to lament and to learn to grieve. And so David, before he is the king, leads the people and the nation, at least who were close to him, in a time of mourning, in a time of lamenting. And if you'll notice this in 2 Samuel 1, he lamented with this lament over Saul and Jonathan. He said it should be taught to the people of Judah, and it's written in the book of Jasher. And so there's 2 or 3 times that we find a biblical book, or let me say it the other way, a book that's written in biblical times that we don't have. But here's his lament. O, the glory of Israel is slain on thy high places. How are the mighty fallen? And Gath and Askelon are Philistine cities. Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Askelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, and lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. Ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor upsurging of the deep, for there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul not anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain and from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and in death they were not divided. And when I read this is pretty amazing, because Jonathan recognizes his own father's shortcomings. When he talks to David and he tries to be an advocate and speak for David, the father even is willing to virtually even kill the son who's being an advocate for David. And this is always touching to me. Jonathan is also loyal to a father with many faults in the same way that his dear friend David is loyal to Saul because he has been the anointed one of God. In life and death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Ye daughters of Jerusalem, weep over Saul, who clothed you daintily in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? Jonathan lies slain upon the high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant you have been to me, and your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How the mighty are fallen, and the weapons of war have perished. And this is going to be typical of those, let me say it this way, the capacity and the ability to put things into prose and into psalms is something that David is going to excel at least a bit of the Psalms, Lord willing, that we'll look at in the future. And we mentioned this, I call them the Psalms on the run, man on the run. We have this song, we know about this, and I read these, and it just always clicks in my mind. Saul is pursuing David, and David's running for his life, but even that doesn't keep David from pursuing God. And so even in a cave or even in a desolate place, David is going to find something to write on, and notice, not all, but the majority of those Psalms, when David was in the cave, when he was fleeing from Saul, you can write on the back of a 5x7 envelope. You're a man on the run. You don't have the ability and all the tools and stuff that you would have to do otherwise. And yet, even with Saul trying to kill David, the man after God's own heart is always pursuing his relationship with God. So if you look at number 1, David is anointed then as king over Judah. And this is going to be one of his strengths. And I didn't go back and do several of these in 1 Samuel. But how often before David does something, you'll find this passage, he inquired of the Lord. And whether he goes to Samuel, Abiathar, or different ones in 1 Samuel, this was very much a part of his practice before he just jumped in and did something. Let's inquire of the Lord. And so when he does, he's instructed to move to Hebron, which is going to be south of Jerusalem, so it's going to be in South Judea. And there's up to 600 men and their families. They move into this area, and this becomes their stronghold and their place. In the northern kingdom, then one of the primary characters is going to be Abner. And Abner is going to take one of Saul's sons, who appears to be weak physically and emotionally and otherwise, and his name is Ishbosheth. And he anoints him as the new king of Israel. And then there's a skirmish, and there's 3 brothers. Joab is one of these. And as they're trying to hunt Abner down, he actually kills one of these 3 brothers. A truce is called. And then I'm at 1:3 right in the middle. And this is just one of those strange things. One of the ways that you maintain power and control is once the king dies, Abner then takes one of the concubines for his wife or his partner, however you want to say that. Ishbosheth takes offense at that. He raises that up with Abner, and that's actually going to cause a breach between the two. And eventually, this newly appointed king is going to be killed, and the kingdoms are going to come together under David. And it was just one of those tragic type things. So if you see number 2, David is made king over all of Israel. So we're in 2 Samuel 5, the first 5 verses. All of the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, Behold, we are your bone and your flesh. And so after Abner has appointed one of the sons, and one of the sons has been killed, then they finally consolidate and they come together. And in the past, when Saul was king, it was you who led out and brought in Israel. And the Lord said to you, and this is going to be a very important term, you shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you will be prince over Israel. And remember, most of the time when God refers to, and it doesn't matter if it's Saul or David, depending upon your translations, he won't call him king, primarily to be prince, ruler, leader. God typically, remember from the Psalms, lift up your heads, O heavenly gate, that the kings of glory may come in. Who is the king of glory? The Lord, strong and mighty. So God, it's a theocracy. God is the king, and David or Saul is either the prince or the ruler, and he's now the prince over Israel. So all of the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron. King David made a covenant with them before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. So there's really three things that have happened. We're going back to the shepherd boy. Remember, they bring all the sons in, not this one, not this one, and the Lord says, I do not look on the outward appearance, I look on the heart. Is there another one? Well, yes, he's out here with the sheep. And they bring in the young David. And so Samuel secretly anoints him initially. He will be anointed to be the king at Hebron, and I think it's going to be 7.5 years he's there. And then finally, he will be anointed to be the king over all of the 12 tribes, and that's what takes place. So when you look at 1 Samuel 5, verse 4, David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. At Jerusalem, he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. Now, this is a lesson more appropriately for our younger people, but it's still appropriate. Sometimes as we go through life, we all get impatient with either where we are or what's going on in our lives. Okay? You're going to know what I'm trying to say. I've been in churches where some mothers are dressing their 13 and 14-year-old girls like they're 40, and then the 40-year-old mothers are dressing like they are 13 and 14. And I think they're missing it on both sides. And there are just things in our life that sometimes we wish would either go quicker, that something would happen. And one of those songs that I love is, Teach me, Lord, to what? Wait. And I'm the first to tell you that's easier said than done. But isn't this interesting? Rather than forcing another war and pushing everything on and immediately becoming king, David is only king of Judah 7.5 years. But here's the other side. How old was Jesus when he began his ministry? Roughly 30 years. Was that wasted time? And I haven't done this lesson for a long time, but it's hypothetical, but you'll see where this is going. What did he do the first 30 years? He watched the birds of the air. He looked at the lilies of the field. He heard stories about sons who had ran away from home. And in God's time, nothing is wasted if we are waiting on God and observing and looking. And again, here is the man after God's own heart. And rather than forcing the issue and causing a major civil war and a major division, then 7.5 years, he's the king down in Hebron. And then in God's own time, when it's appropriate, then God's going to bring those things about, and that's what takes place. 2:2 at the very bottom, as David becomes king, and this to me is one of those brilliant things that he does, rather than going to an existing city and making it the capital, he decides, let's conquer one of the enemy strongholds that we've not conquered. If we have, it's been a long time and we've lost that. And rather than being favorite or favoritism between one of two Israeli cities, let's just conquer an enemy territory. Would Fort Worth ever be happy if Dallas became the capital of Texas? If you know anything about inner city rivalry, there's just a really strong thing. Same thing in Australia. Neither Sydney or Melbourne could ever exist if the other one became the capital, so they really went and built like a Washington, D.C. in the mountains because the rivalry between the two cities is so strong. Well, rather than promoting a rivalry, David says, hey, let's go conquer an enemy city. Let's conquer a stronghold. And as they approach it, they don't think he can do it, first of all. And you will not come in here, 2 Samuel 5 and 6. The blind and the lame will ward you off. And David has a strategy. They take the city, and Jerusalem, which had been a stronghold, now becomes the new capital. And the fact that the new king takes new territory and a new city and makes this his capital is just indicative of the things that's going to take place and the things that are going to happen. Craig. Thank you. So we're at the bottom of the first page. Glad you're here. And so there's up to 72 different references to what Jerusalem is called. Here's a good sample. First of all, it's oftentimes called the city of David. Well, why would you call Jerusalem the city of David? Well, after the 7.5 years and after he is now anointed by all of the elders, and they say, hey, fellas, let's get together and let's take this city, and it will be called the city of David. When you also look at the names, Jerusalem, the city of peace, and I'll break this down here in just a second. The other one is Zion, the fortresses that Jerusalem is built around. And see, how often do we sing, oh, Zion? And you hear all of these different terms that even are in our hymnology and in our things today. But here's the bottom little paragraph. The name Jerusalem consists of two names, Yara, meaning the Lord will provide, and Shalem, meaning peace, like Shalom. Jerusalem was first called Shalem in Genesis 14. Abraham changed it to Yera, and these two names combine, the Lord will provide peace. And so as David consolidates the 12 tribes together, then the new capital, the new place then, is formed in Jerusalem. So on the back of the second page, the next thing that happens, the perennial enemies, the Philistines, and you stop and think, after David finally feels like he's pushed out of Israel, he then goes and lives in Ziklag, and they do a lot of raids, they do a lot of stuff, but he forms such loyalty that Ziklag is going to become a permanent part of Israel because it was kind of on the boundary. But he has got to know the Philistines very well because he's lived very close to them. And it was especially because of the force and the power of the Philistines that the people wanted a king in the first place. When you come to the next one, and this to me is one of those marks of inspiration of the Bible. Even for the man after God's own heart, the Bible doesn't either downplay, overlook, or whitewash a person's sins. And the reason I wanted to mention this earlier, consistently up to this point, David is always, well, inquire of the Lord. Let's inquire of the Lord. Urim, Thummim, priest or something. Let's just don't rush in and do something. Let's inquire of the Lord. Let me process a half second. Let me try to say it this way, and let me speak for myself, and if it applies to you, then hopefully the shoe will fit in that sense. I find sometimes in looking back, there were things that I jumped in and did that I might not have done if I'd spent a little more time praying about it. Everybody understand kind of where I'm going with that? There are kind of things in our lives that we've probably all done that may not have been totally bad or totally sinful, but in hindsight, if I'd either talked to someone who are wiser, spent a little more time, and if at all possible, especially with major things, can I use the term? I like to put it in the crock pot for a while and pray about it, because oftentimes that initial first reaction may not always be the best thing to do. So we've conquered the city, we've got everything together, and remember they took the ark out to battle, and it had been captured by the Philistines and carried away, and God smote them with plagues and stuff. And then at a point in time, they thought, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to take 2 mama milk cows, meaning they've got calves, and we're going to hook them up to a cart. We're going to put the ark in it. We're going to put some golden mice in it kind of for, I wouldn't use the word good luck charms. I don't know all my spirituous cultural terms, but we're going to put those in. And if the mama cows go to Israel, meaning they're going to leave their calves that they're nursing, then this is what the gods want us to do. So that's what the Philistines did. So how does the ark that the Philistines captured ever get back? Well, they put it on a cart with 2 milk cows in the front, and typically the cows are not going to leave their baby calves. And depending on your translation, lowing, bellowing, and these 2 cows head toward Israel, and the Philistines think, well, that must be what the gods wanted to do because these mama cows took the ark to Israel. Well, I mention that because a few years later, they do basically the same thing that the Philistines did. And so they're going to move the ark from where it has been to the city of Shalom, the city of peace. And in terms of, what terms do I want to use? Practicality, is that a word? In terms of something that you think, well, this would be something good to do. They get a new cart and oxen, and they're going to bring the ark into Jerusalem that way. But I bolded this statement from David because, again, this is the essence. When you look at the tabernacle is built after Exodus 19, where God says, you will become my portable treasure, is his term for Israel. And when they hurl the blood on the people in Exodus 19 with that covenant, then the people become God's portable treasure. And so God is going to need to be able to camp out in the midst of an unholy and a sinful people. So we're going to build a tabernacle with a holy and a holy of holies, so a holy God can live among an unholy people. And that's where this Ark of the Covenant had been. And so in bold, David's going to say, to bring up the Ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherub. So I use the term, they chose a functional, common sense way, and they carried the ark up on a new cart. And as I said, this is how the Philistines carried it. However, if you go back to Exodus 25, 12 through 15, Exodus 37, 1 through 5, God had said, put 2 rings on either side of the ark. You run a pole through it, and the priests are to carry the ark on their shoulders on poles. Do not touch it. And the poles are long enough that 2 guys would be up front, 2 guys would be up back, the ark would be in the middle, but you carry the ark on your shoulders. Now, I don't even want to go here. You just kind of go like this. Can you imagine carrying that Jim, can you imagine carrying that in the sands of the desert in 105, 110 degree weather? I mean, you just stop and think about these guys. It would be like going to a sauna to be carrying the artifacts of the tabernacle and this other stuff, but especially the Ark of the Covenant, and leave those poles on it, and you carry that ark with those poles. Here's one of those occasions that David does not inquire of the Lord. He does not stop and think, I wonder what God said through Moses 500 years ago. And when God's people carry the ark in the same way the Philistines happened, every time I read this, guess what happens in my mind? Dun, 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 dun. And the oxen stumble, and I'm very empathetic. I would probably do the same thing. What does Uzzah do? We don't want it to fall. And when he reaches up and touches something from the Holy of Holies, God strikes him dead. David is initially angry because, again, their intentions were good overall. We're going to bring the ark in. And yet, this was an occasion where David did not inquire. He did not ask, how did God want us to do that? And so when you look at this, and I'm down at number 3 on the bottom. No, let me step a little further than the top. 3:3, Uzzah struck dead. They're going to leave the ark in the home of Obed, Edom, a Gittite, for 3 months. And then they finally bring the ark in, and guess what they do? They go get poles, they get the priest, they bring it in, they offer sacrifices. And here's what's significant, and this is going to come in even later after which we won't get into. The ark is placed into a tent in Jerusalem. And Lord willing, what we're going to see next week is that in chapter 7, 12 through 14 is one of the most significant passages in the Old Testament because David says, I live in a house, and God's ark is in this tent. I want to build a house for the Lord. And then God sends the prophet to him, and he says, you will not build of me a house, but what? I will make of you a house. Now, this is for the very end of the class. Some of you will and won't be here, and some of you may not remember by the end of the class, and we'll do it again. Who is the first person that we meet in the New Testament? This is the beginning of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, son of David. And who is the last person? We're accepting Jesus. Who's the last person that we meet in the book of Revelation? The bright and morning star, the root of David. And while God in the Old Testament makes himself known as the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when the blind and the lame and whatever else come close to our Lord, who do they cry out? Son of David. And so the promises, I will make of you a great nation, will continue for 2,000 years until Christ. And the promise, I will make of you a house, is going to begin 1,000 years and will still be going on by the time we come to the New Testament. So if you look under one last thing above the dotted line, and this is hard. Saul's daughter, who had been the first wife, whether it's appropriate or not, David is dancing, rejoicing, and all this stuff. And one of his wives comes out and rebukes him. She uses some very harsh terms. And if you want to read that, I didn't write them down, but she just basically really takes him to task because of that. And he reciprocates verbally, doesn't touch her physically, and basically criticizes her very harshly. And then the text says she never had children. And I think probably because he never had relations with her after that. As tragic as that is, that's also a part of the family of Saul diminishing. And this is just, every once in a while you read things and you just kind of shake the chills down because of the harshness of the things that happened. So here's our dotted line. And we're going to do 5 of these. With the death of Saul and his older son, David will finally be anointed king of Judah. And there's going to be a rivalry where David's going to prevail. And then here's this subplot, and notice this contrast that's going to go on. Some of the people closest to David, like Joab, are going to make very questionable ethical and moral decisions. And like, for example, it's not going to be the first time. Joab is going to trick Abner, get him to come down, who's made an alliance, and he's feeling like, David, you've been taken, and Joab is going to kill Abner, and that's not the first time. But the other side is that, and we'll see this as well, David had the capacity to draw people close to him and bring out the best in them. Do you remember it starts with a few, and we'll see numbers of 200, 400, and finally 600 men. They're everything from oppressed to debt-ridden, no one else wants, but they go to David, and these guys will lay down their life for him. And that's one of those wonderful things, is that some of the people around David are impetuous and make questionable ethical and moral decisions. And then there's a streak of loyalty that's just as solid as a rock that runs from David to the people who are closest to him. So the second one is, and this is important, within the plots and the subplots, and even Joab's hasty actions, God's purposes are ultimately going to prevail. And you remember when we've talked about this? God didn't force Judas to take the 30 pieces of silver. Watch, can I do this? And you see what I'm trying to say? God put someone who's there, and in the book of Matthew, after that very expensive vial of perfume has been broken, the treasurer who's helping himself to it, what does he say? Could not this money have been sold and given to the poor? And Matthew says, then he went to the high priest. And it very well may have been his own greed, his own desire for things that caused him to fulfill prophecies that God had made for hundreds of years, but God in no way violates his free will in order for that to happen. And with these prophecies, and whether it's Samuel when he's a small boy, all of these things are going to be fulfilled and God's will is going to be performed, sometimes even through the weaknesses and the sinfulness of the people who are involved. We're at number 3. The tragic death of Uzzah is the solemn reminder of the importance of always seeking to do God's will as is revealed to us. And we're going to actually come back to this just before we close, but think about this. And there's dozens, but here's one. One of those anchor verses that I think is really important for us to hang on to, and it's easy to remember, it's Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things belong to God. And if you've been in the church very long, and especially someone in a position like Kelly who visits a lot of people, sometimes people will ask us a question that there really just may not be a straight biblical answer for. Why we're not in the place of God. And that's why I've told you when I go visit someone, there's been a tragedy or a death, remember, like the BLT, but it's BLD, I'm not even going to try to speak for God. And I'm going to be there. I'm going to listen. And the D is, if possible, I will do something to serve them, but I'm not even going to try to answer, why did God let this happen? And that's something that's very, very important. The secret things belong to God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children that we may do them. And what's ironic is that some people spend so much time on the secret things that belong to God that they never get around to doing the things that are very clear. I mentioned this on Sunday. Remember, we met a guy moving to Sydney 5 or 6 hours away. Charlie and I met him at a Greek school. He is moving to some place called Campbelltown, and Charlie keeps his phone number, and he ends up moving next door to my brother and sister-in-law, Kent and Nancy Hartman. How does a guy move from 6 hours to a city of 3.5 million people that you meet in a Greek summer school by accident? And the only way, and Charlie said, I'll help you with your Greek, and the only way to learn Greek is Matthew 28:18 and 20. Next week we'll translate Mark 16:15 and 16. Next week we'll translate Acts 2:38. Anybody understand what's happening? They translate every significant passage in the New Testament about baptism for someone who's a Presbyterian who's been sprinkled. That's the only way to learn Greek, is to study every passage in the New Testament on baptism. And at a point in time, Fred says, boy, the New Testament's pretty clear on this baptism stuff, isn't it? And see, we can get so involved with the why that we don't major on what we know and what we can do. And there's plenty of things that are very clear. And a famous person once said, I'm not nearly as worried about the passages I don't understand as the passages that I do that I'm not living the way that I ought to. And this is something that's to me, very, very significant. And so, when you look at 1 Chronicles 15, this isn't in Samuel, then this is where David says, oh, okay, this is what happened. And remember last week, one of David's virtues is that when he's criticized personally, remember Abigail comes to him and says, oh, my husband's name is Nabal, he's a fool, but please don't kill him and don't do the bloodshed. Nathan the prophet, after the affair with Bathsheba, comes and says, you're the man. David is open to taking personal criticism, and David apparently either has been told or reads these passages from Moses, and he says, because we did not seek him according to the rule, and the Levites should carry on their shoulders with the poles, as Moses commanded the people. And so, Scripture is very clear, and this will be on the next page. Each of us will be only responsible for our personal sins. The soul that sins will die. The Son will not bear the iniquity of the Father, and neither will the Father bear the iniquity of the Son. But the soul that sins will die. And so you stop and think, when we stand before judgment, we will neither answer directly for what our fathers did or directly what our children may have done. But having said that, there's something very significant. We pass on to the next generation more than the color of their hair and the color of their eyes. And there's a whole lesson. I just did one of these. What does Abraham say about Sarah? She's my sister. A few years later, guess what the son Isaac says? Oh, she's my sister. You come to the third generation, and his name is Heel Grabber. Jacob will just take you to the bank any way that he can. He's deceptive and on. And he'll put lambskins on so his blind father will think that he's his brother and give him the blessing. And then the 10 sons say, oh, let's sell him to Egypt, kill an animal, dip his clothes in it. Oh, Father, an animal ate him. You can go in 4 generations, and it all starts with a white, harmless lie, and each generation progresses even more. And one of the things that we need to think about is that there's a potential to pass into the next generation more than our physical characteristics, and our children and grandchildren will watch us and will read us like a book. My dad on the farm says, you can't fool dogs and you can't fool kids. And you stop and think, our kids will see us at our best and at our worst, and we all need to be careful about our own personal character. Well, where are we going? When Solomon is old, his 700 wives and the little boy from Bible class said 300 porcupines turned his heart away from God. How did that happen? Well, when David is waiting at Hebron, he is going to take a whole collection of wives, and I'm reading 1 Samuel 5:13. He took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he came from Hebron, sons and daughters. But I want you to look at this list. These are the ones that we know about: Ahinoam, Abigail, Maacah, Haggith, Abital, and Michael. Before we have the affair with Bathsheba, we have 6 wives already. Okay? And then you can see on the right hand, there are sons that we know. And then this is from ages 30 to 37. When we go to Jerusalem, we're going to have Bathsheba, and she's going to have 4 children that we know. And then here are unnamed wives and a whole list of things. So the family that we can count is 20 sons, and we know 1 daughter by name. Where did Solomon get the idea of having many wives? You see what I'm saying? What took place in one generation can also then be passed down, and the fault or the sin, whatever it may be, the shortcoming, may be even more pronounced in the generation to come. Okay, survivors, if you're still here, last page. And you think, can he do it in 5 minutes? Look at these questions. How much individual time can David spend with 30 or 40 kids? What type of family rivalry are you going to have? Can I just use British royalty and look at even a small number of sons? And what do you do if you're not ever going to get to become the king? I could also say, how much trouble can you get in as one of the royals with finances and then not ever been able to become the king? How many temptations for sin are going to exist in Solomon's house with 700 wives and 300 concubines? Do you begin to see what's going on? And how did this all start? For the virtues of the man after God's own heart, here's an area that was not a virtue, and Solomon is just going to take what David had done and expand it more and more. And so this is my term, number 5. Generational sins tend to get stronger as you pass down. Real quick, Joshua, me and my house will serve the Lord. Judges 2, oh, here came a generation that knew not the Lord. By the time you get to Jeremiah in chapter 5, do you remember Sodom and Gomorrah? If you can find how many people will save the city? 10 people. God says to Jeremiah, go out and find 1. Can you find one man in Jerusalem who does righteousness and justice? And Jeremiah goes to this area and this area and this area. And Jeremiah 5, 1 through 3, they had all broken the yoke. They had all broke the bond. And finally God says, don't waste your breath. Don't pray for them. And you see what I'm saying? Through the generations, yes, we pass down hair color. Yes, we pass down color of eyes. We pass family characteristics physically. But we all need to be really conscious about working with our own character, because our children will know more about us than we actually are aware. I listened to a dad say once, I heard my son say something to one of his children, and I thought, where did he learn to talk like that? And he said, the next time I spoke to him, I thought, aha, it's a recording. He is speaking to the next generation exactly like and he said, I tried really hard to change that, because he was listening very carefully and observing what I was doing. So here's the final thoughts as we finish up. Remember, David most of the time inquires of the Lord, and here are very specific instructions about the ark that they ignore, and because of that, Uzzah lost his life and all these things happened. And this is the question that came to my mind. Today, how much service and worship is offered to God today in new carts and new oxen, which God has neither authorized or approved? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? If you talk with very many people around us, there's all kinds of things being brought in and done that have no scriptural authority, they have no example, and here are things that I hear. Well, you know, God would want me to use my gift in worship. My daughter's a really fantastic singer, and she should be singing solos at church, and God wants her to use her gift. Well, I know this isn't mentioned in the Bible, but, well, it's important that people hear contemporary music when they come to services today. And the one I love the most, well, if Paul were alive today. And I don't say this to castigate anybody, but just to say, when were the instructions that David violated written down? Moses is 500 years earlier. And God hadn't changed his mind. God hadn't forgotten. And the things that God had written down through Moses 500 years earlier were still applying today. But Lord, if you would just send back somebody from the dead, then my brothers would believe. And what do they tell him? They have Moses and the prophets. And if they won't believe Moses and the prophets, neither will they believe someone raised from the dead. Look at the premium and the value that God places on us listening, honoring, and living by this book. And even though David didn't do that initially, he quickly self-corrected. The ark was there for 3 months. They put the poles in it, and they made the corrections, and they went on. And that's why when I read this passage from Deuteronomy 29, these, yes, the secret things belong to God, but these things belong to us and to our children and hopefully our grandchildren to come, in order that we may do them. And without any apology, it's amazing when someone doesn't want you to talk anymore, they can shut you down. Without any apology, let's be people of the book. And in what we do and what we practice, let's, to the best of our ability, be able to say, thus saith the Lord. God bless. Thank you.